So the last time we made a video talking about these two parties, and I say parties because I'm referring to a player and a team, it was a very well-received video. We had New Jersey fans in the comments and Minnesota fans talking about how this idea was one that they both liked, and we had a conversation about the player in a way that kind of highlighted both the positives and the negatives. The positives, because this guy is a young guy who is a talented guy, he can score. We also talked about the negatives in that he needs a contract, he is an RFA, and he did not show up for the Minnesota Wild in the playoffs in the ways that a lot of Wild fans would have liked. Today, we are talking about Kevin Fiala once again, and highlighting the same talk that we had last video where we discussed the idea of him getting traded over to the New Jersey Devils in exchange for what was the Devils' first-round pick. Now, back then, 3 weeks ago when we talked about this initially, the Devils' first-round pick was not known. We knew it was going to be a top pick, we just didn't know how high it was going to be, and then it eventually became second overall. However, it's not actually all too bad, because based off of what I had seen in the comment section of that video, there were a few Devils fans saying things like, hey, even if we get the second overall pick or the first overall pick, this is still a trade idea that I would be on board with. It's still something that I would like to explore, trading away our first round pick, whether it's a top pick or not, for Kevin Fiala and the signing rights for this player. Let's go over and review firstly Kevin Fiala as a player, and then we'll go over why exactly we're bringing this entire idea up again. Kevin Fiala, as we had noted, he's an RFA. He's 25 years old, turning 26 in July, 5'10", 205 as a left-handed winger center. He's a guy who scored 85 points in 82 games this season and 33 goals as well. He only produced 3 points in the 6-game sample he had against the St. Louis Blues in the playoffs, and 0 of those points were goals, leading to a lot of Wild fans saying things like, hey, Kirill Kaprizov is not the only guy that can go out there and score goals. Where the heck is everybody else? Why is everybody else not scoring any goals? We have a good offensive core that showed off in the regular season that they can get it done, but in the playoffs, for some reason, you didn't see too much out of Kevin Fiala. You didn't see too much out of Ryan Hartman. There were a lot of disappointments all throughout the lineup. But when it comes to Kevin Fiala, he still is an RFA, meaning that the only team that can actually sign him to a contract and have it work out with no problems is the Minnesota Wild. Another team can go out there and offer Fiala a contract and he can accept it, but that team would need to go out there and give compensation to the Wild because that would be an offer sheet. Either way, the Wild would be getting assets if they keep Fiala, if they send him away, or if another team offer sheets this guy. It just depends what exactly those assets are going to be. This is a player that could demand a pretty significant amount of money, and the Wild are in a pretty big cap crunch right now. It's why they're in a conversation to trade this guy away, and it's why the New Jersey Devils are the prime targets in this talk as well. They've got a lot of cap space to burn, and they're a team that has a lot of young talent developing and looking to be ready to take the next step in the next few years. It's why a lot of Devils fans in my comment section specifically have been saying, yeah, we have a lot of young guys, and they're all developing, but now is the time for us to really take that next step. Jack Hughes is looking like a franchise superstar. Nico Hischier's our captain. Luke Hughes can wait a little bit in the NCAA before coming over, but we've still got Dawson Mercer, Alexander Holtz, a lot of other young defensemen, like Muhammad Doolin, for example, that are looking to maybe make the jump over the next few seasons too. If I could make a deal with God and get him to swap our places, and we would be in a position to run up that hill. Which is why the idea presents itself that, hey, do you really want to wait an extra 4 or 5 years for a player that you draft at second overall, whether that's Slavkovsky or Cooley or whatever, to become quote-unquote good? Or would you trade that pick away now to get a player who is already a point-per-game superstar, already a 30-goal guy, and already somebody that could have some pretty good chemistry with fellow Swiss player Nico Hischier? There was an article published on The Athletic the other day by Lisa Dillman, her latest LA Kings mailbag, and one of the little paragraphs from that article was posted here on the Twitter, and it went sort of viral. This is why we're talking about this idea here today. Most everybody that Dillman talks to believes the frontrunner in the Fiala sweepstakes is New Jersey. For 2 reasons. 1, Fiala looks as if he could be a good fit alongside fellow Swiss player Nico Hischier, a core piece going forward for the Devils, and 2, the Devils have the necessary cap space to give Fiala the raise that he'll need in order to forego free agency and sign a long-term extension. They also have the draft capital and young players needed to make a deal happen. If I go over to the comment section of our previous video, I've got a lot of Wild fans also saying the same thing. Yeah, there are a lot of young guys on our team, and they're going to get better. Matthew Boldy's going to get better. Kirill Kaprizov, he is already one of the best players in the league, but he's shockingly still got some room to grow. Apparently, we had some word from Michael Russo that Bill Guerin and Tom Fitzgerald are also friends, so there might be some more connections over there too. And for the Minnesota Wild, they're in a position where they're already good enough that they can wait the 4 or 5 years that it would take to really have a Slafkovsky develop into a good player, or a Logan Cooley to develop into a good player too. Most of these players are not going to be NHL ready right off the bat. You might have a Logan Cooley who goes to Minnesota State for the Golden Gophers in the NCAA. He has a fantastic season, and then he comes over after. But you remember what the Wild did with Matthew Boldy too. Sure, he was plagued by injuries, but he still took an extra few years before becoming a full-time NHL player. For Slafkovsky, while he might become an NHL player sooner than a lot of these guys, I don't really know how long it would take for him to reach his absolute peak, because he does have a ceiling that is significantly higher than a lot of the other guys in this year's draft, I believe. It's just a very unattainable ceiling if you're only looking into the next 2 or 3 years. So for Wild fans, you guys can wait a little bit. You guys have the team that is already good enough to make it into the playoffs, and getting rid of Kevin Fiala and replacing that value with extra draft capital could, in some capacity, relieve your team in the short term, because you still do have your cap crunch that you're going to have to deal with. It's the entire reason why Kevin Fiala is even on the block, despite being an RFA. The team's got $7 million in cap space to burn. They've got a re-signed Dewar, Fiala, Bukestad, Delorier, Jordy Ben, Jacob Middleton, and Marc-Andre Fleury. Now, not all those names are going to come back, but $7 million just for Kevin Fiala alone, it doesn't really look like a number that he would be comfortable with, considering the fact that he is already in the prime of his career with a point-per-game season, and he is only in his mid-20s. There is a very real possibility that he could get greater too. Having Kevin Fiala play with a Jack Hughes is exciting. Having Kevin Fiala play with a fellow Swiss and Nico Hischier also sounds exciting too. I do like the potential of having a Hughes and a Holtz pairing on a line and Hischier-Fiala on another line, because just having that playmaking, sniping combo looks like a very versatile kind of way to make your lineup work. And plus, if you have everybody stacked up on a power play with Luke Hughes, for example, then I think you really have a team that in the next 4 or 5 years would be an absolute powerhouse. Not even just taking the hump over, like they could do that next year. They're good enough to do that next year, I believe. But in a few years, this team could be absolutely phenomenal with Kevin Fiala already as a mentor leadership figure helping out another sniper like Alexander Holtz. Kind of feels like a match made in heaven, doesn't it? I don't know. You can let me know in the comments all your thoughts about this idea. Kevin Fiala and the New Jersey Devils. This is the second time we've talked about it, because the article on the LA Kings mailbag says that apparently the Devils are indeed the frontrunners. And, you know, just another thought before we end off this video, I wanted to say that I could totally understand why New Jersey is the frontrunner at this time. The only other team that we have been seeing linked to Fiala in a greater capacity has been the Ottawa Senators, and with all the stuff going on in Ottawa right now, the fact that they're also vulnerable to trading their top pick in this year's draft, I mean, it makes sense that Ottawa would also be there, but I don't know, it just feels like based off of all the media stuff we've seen, New Jersey and New Jersey fans might want this more. Plus the fact that they weren't even supposed to get a second overall pick in the first place. They won a lottery. This is extra value being awarded to them by the ping pong balls. So all of a sudden, this is like a get out of jail free card. This is some extra value you're given for free. Why not use that to leverage a Kevin Fiala or a JT Miller conversation more in your favor? We'd already talked at length about Miller and that second overall pick, but then again, JT Miller is somebody who has another year left, and he might actually get salary retained, so it's a little bit different from Fiala now, isn't it? Also, he's a lot older and more mature, I think, but talk to me in the comments all your thoughts if you're a Wild or a Devils fan about the Kevin Fiala situation, how apparently New Jersey is the frontrunner right here. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think the Devils are going to make this trade? What do you think they give up in the trade? Is it the second overall pick if you're a Wild fan? If you get second, who would you want to draft? Logan Cooley, Slafkovsky, Nemec? Who the heck is on your radar? Talk to me in the comments all your thoughts. I hope you enjoyed this video. 99, and bye.